Hello and welcome to the 2015 NIRSA Regional Basketball Officials webinar. My name is Chris Cox, Assistant Director for Intramural Sports at Clemson University, and presenting with me today will also be Jamie McLean, Graduate Assistant for Intramural Sports at Clemson University. Together, Jamie and I are going to review several items, beginning with NIRSA Championship Series regional sites, opportunity for students throughout the country in the various regions, general information with regional basketball tournaments that include what to plan for, your attire, your equipment, interactions that you may have, things that are going to be expected of you. We're also going to touch on NIRSA's new transgender participation policy, and then head into more rule specifics with uniforms, player equipment, timing, guarding, block charge, screens, traveling, some foul specifics, and three-person mechanics. You can see on your screen the various regional and national host sites. So be aware of those and those dates and those weekends that the different tournaments are occurring. Officials from each regional will be named as all tournament officials depending on that tournament and the number of officials for that, and they will receive bids to the national championship tournament the weekend of April 17th through 19th at North Carolina State University. For anyone that's interested in learning more about various involvement opportunities within NIRSA, we encourage you to reach out to your regional representative or regional student representative, student leader. You can check out the contact information posted here. Also, they'll be aware of any upcoming elections or changes in leadership. I know those update from time to time, so be sure to check the NIRSA website for any updates that may be added to this list. Moving into regional tournament specifics, things that you can plan for. First being teams that are coming from all over your region. So that's going to include large and small schools, players that may not be familiar with NCS tournament format and rules. So that may be part of your interaction with them, especially as the tournament begins, and making sure that everyone is familiar with tournament rules and game rules that you're going to be abiding by. Same thing with your fellow officials coming from all over the place, so certainly be ready to meet new people. While it's certainly common to be a little timid or nervous at first, definitely don't be afraid to approach people and introduce yourself. Use this opportunity at the tournament at the time to build some connections that may last a while, and you can meet people that can really help you learn and help you even just enjoy your time at the tournament a little bit more. Typically, expect to have an officials meeting the Friday afternoon or evening heading into your tournament weekend, so be on time for that. Plan ahead, whether it's stopping to get gas or food or accounting for traffic, anything like that. Make sure you've got plenty of time to get there. Typically, we would say that you want to bring your officiating gear with you into that meeting. You may or may not have time to head back to your hotel or the car to grab that sort of stuff, so it never hurts to be prepared and bring that sort of stuff in with you. Heading into that meeting as well, try your best to dress professionally. You know, you're going to represent your institution, your university, so whatever that means to you, we have some recommendations, whether that's a school polo or shirt or being clean-shaven, things like that. Whatever, again, the professional appearance is for you, you want to have that ready to go for that Friday officials meeting. And again, in terms of your own attire that you're going to wear throughout the tournament, black basketball officiating pants, your V-neck stripes, black undershirt and socks, whistles, and black athletic shoes. You may want to bring a couple extra pair of stripes or whistles and things like that just to be prepared. Things that will be expected of you as an official at the tournament. First being your interaction with evaluators. So if you have never officiated off campus, one thing to expect will be on-site evaluations from members of the officials committee. So those folks are there to help you learn and get better. Take that information for what it's worth. Try not to argue with that sort of feedback. You may not agree with everything that you hear, but the evaluations are really what officials can use and take with them to get better while at the tournament. From time to time, evaluators may make a mistake. If you ever disagree with anything you hear or just need any added clarification, don't hesitate to talk to the director of officials at your tournament and make sure you're on the same page with the information that's being passed down to you. When interacting with your peers, your other officials, do everything you can to be a good crew member. whether that's knowing your schedule and making sure you're there early enough to prepare and pregame with your crew, knowing what each other's roles and responsibilities are going to be, clarifying any points of emphasis that you may have so that you can be on the same page. You want to do your best to not only help yourself, but the people that you're working with as well. The R of your crew is typically going to head that sort of conversation up. So if you are named R of a crew during the tournament, be prepared to really initiate that conversation and make sure that everyone on your court is ready to roll. Interacting with participants, be professional with them. You know, whether that's the use of sir or ma'am, do whatever you can to ask questions appropriately when time permits. You know, that's not necessarily every time anyone asks you anything during play, but maybe during a dead ball or before or after the game. Certainly answer questions and interact with participants during the weekend. One last expectation, and it's really something we just want to encourage more so, is to take that time and reflect on what you're learning. It's a great opportunity for you that weekend. You're going to get a ton of information thrown at you. Do what you can to bring as much back with you to your campus. That's going to help you become a better official while you're there. So bring that stuff back to campus so that you can help others learn and get better as well. Some quick tournament basics. Player uniforms and equipment is pretty standard. Teams are going to be required to wear numbered shirts or jerseys that are one distinguishable color. Things like jewelry, casts, or non-athletic shoes are not going to be permitted. I think big piece with that is just know that as an official at the tournament, you may be called upon to kind of check players as they're coming in and make sure that nothing like that is happening or that they're wearing anything they shouldn't be wearing. With timing and the clock, games will consist of 2 20-minute halves. That will be a running clock except for the final 2 minutes in each half. So at that point, underneath 2 minutes, the clock will start on every whistle. Teams will get 3 timeouts per game, lasting 1 minute in length. If you are playing overtime, that period would consist of just 3 minutes, and the clock will run continuously there except for the final 1 minute of your overtime, and 1 timeout per team for the overtime period. One additional piece of information we wanted to pass along is NIRSA's new Transgendered Participation policy. You may or may not have experience interacting with this population on your campus, specifically when it relates to their participation eligibility. You can see NIRSA's participation policy in the chart below and look at the specific details there. Also know that many transgender participants have a preferred name or pronoun that they want to use to describe themselves, such as they or their in replace of he or she or his or her. As always, we just want to prepare ourselves as best we can to accommodate all participants in the games while we're at the tournament. And certainly, again, this includes being aware of any disrespectful or vulgar language actions aimed at anybody and identifying that and addressing it or reprimanding it as needed. I am going to now pass over to Jamie, who's going to get more into rules specifics for you.
Like Chris said, my name is Jamie McLean. I am the graduate assistant for intramural sports at Clemson University. And I'm going to go over some basic rules of what you're expected to know heading into your tournament. So we're not going to really get into some specific stuff that you may know or may find out at this tournament. We're going to go over some basic stuff that we expect you to know and prepare yourself for the tournament. So when we talk about this information, I go over it, just review it for a little bit, and consult it with your tournament director before the tournament for added points or emphasis. I know they'll go over in a pre-presentation before their tournament what they want you to know for their specific tournament. So go over that stuff and take this rule basics with a grain of salt. Our 2015 updates, we do have a couple things that we'll be talking about in here regarding hand checks and going into the free throw on a free throw release. So keep in mind as we look at this stuff, we will be talking about a couple different updates that are different from past tournaments that you may have been at. Some rules to know. The first thing that we'll talk about is guarding. So in general on guarding, when we talk about that, we are talking about every player is entitled to their spot on the floor. So as an official, we're officiating the defense, and we're identifying whether a player has their illegal guarding position on the floor. So to obtain that legal guarding position, each player must have both feet on the floor and their torso facing the opponent. If a player has that legal guarding position, they are in position to guard and they cannot make a foul unless they go outside of their frame. So a player who extends an arm, shoulder, hip, or leg into the path of an opponent is not considered to have legal position. So that is illegal, and a foul could be called in that scenario if they go outside of the legal guarding position. So For officiating the defense, we really need to pick up if a defensive player is legal and whether they can commit a foul in that scenario. One of our big points of emphasis is freedom of movement. You may have seen at the college and high school level more of an emphasis on hand checks and play on the perimeter, and we'll talk about that with RSBQ, which can be referred to as rhythm, speed, balance, or quickness. When a defensive player affects the rhythm, speed, balance, or quickness of a player, a legal contact has occurred. We must address this contact early in the game and often. This affects our game if they're able to gain an advantage. The offensive player isn't allowed to get to their spot on the floor that they want, and that is illegal contact and needs to be addressed from the beginning of your game. Along with legal guarding positions comes the block charge play. So when we talk about blocking, defined as illegal personal contact which impedes the progress of an opponent. So blocking is illegal defensive contact that doesn't prevent or prevents the offensive player from getting to the spot that they want. So if the defender is not legal, a blocking foul can be called. If the defender is legal and the offensive player makes illegal contact with them by pushing or moving them into their torso, a charging foul can be called. Now be aware that not always contact on a defensive player that is legal can be deemed a charging foul. It has to be in your decision a push or a move or displacement of that defensive player to cause a charging foul. Along with legal guarding position, the defender is entitled to their spot on the floor all the way up to the ceiling, and that is the principle of verticality. If a player jumps straight up from their legal spot on the floor, they're entitled to that spot and cannot be considered illegal in that time. So if an offensive player goes into them, when they jump straight up in the air, then they are still legal and cannot be called for a defensive foul unless they stick their arms out or do something else. Be aware of that when identifying players and pick up that defender early to be able to identify if they're going up vertically. Things to consider when talking about block charge plays. Did the dribbler stop or change direction to avoid contact? Was the defender in legal guarding position? And was there reasonable space to allow the dribbler to continue his or her path? If we're picking up the defender early in our three-person mechanics, we should be able to identify those three things and really pick up block charge plays. Screens are another thing to talk about, and screens are defined as a legal action by a player who, without causing contact, delays or prevents an opponent from reaching a desired position on the floor. So a screener is someone who is putting themselves in the way of a defender to try and free an offensive player up. To establish legal screening position, an offensive player may face in any direction, but time and distance are relevant. So unlike block charge plays, time and distance are relevant on our screen plays. The screener must remain stationary except when both players are moving in the same path and direction. So a screener must not be moving, must stay inside their frame during the time they are setting a screen. A screener may not, when outside an opponent's visual field, set a screen closer than a normal step from an opponent. So if a screener comes behind a defensive player outside of their visual field, they must give them a step to be able to see them and avoid contact. When screening a stationary opponent from the front or side, the screener may not create contact with the opponent. So sticking an elbow out, sticking an arm out, sticking a knee out, that is all deemed illegal contact and would be an offensive foul and a legal screen on that player. Traveling is another point of emphasis for us in talking about picking up the pivot feet on every player. So moving a foot or foot in any direction in excess of prescribed limits while holding the ball. And you'll talk a little bit about it at your clinics, I know, but picking up the defender's or the offensive player's pivot foot is the most important part. So if we pick up that offensive player's pivot foot, we can always identify whether or not they traveled or not. And when we're explaining it to players or coaches, the best way to explain our travel calls or lack of a travel call is to explain it through use of the term pivot foot. If you can identify that pivot foot and explain it to someone, that's usually your best way of identifying whether it really was a travel or not. Keep in mind, if a player goes to the floor, they may slide to gain possession. So if a player is going along the floor and their momentum carries them along the floor and they have the ball, they may slide if their momentum carries them. They may not, however, roll over or turn over, and that would be deemed a travel. But if they are just on their backside or on their front and stay in that and slide, it is legal. If they are on the ground, they cannot attempt to stand with the ball. Once they are on the ground and stand, that is a travel. Or if they are up and maintain possession of the ball and follow the ground, it also would be a travel. Along with our points of emphasis about fouls on the dribbler, we're talking about one of the things we'll talk about is placing hands on the defender. So an automatic foul is 2 hands on the dribbler. Anytime the defender puts 2 hands on the dribbler, it is an automatic foul and must be addressed. Once a defensive player puts an extended arm bar on the player, it's a foul. Placing and keeping a hand on the player is a foul. And contact the player more than once with the same hand or alternating hand is also a foul. So keep in mind that they may not touch them more than once. Once they touch them once, they have to back off with that player. So keep in mind and identify that early. If we're refereeing the defense and picking up those dribblers early in the game, we can address that sort of stuff and make sure that that doesn't happen in affecting the dribbler. One of the things that you may be new to in your specific tournament is the three-person crew, and not everyone in the country runs a three-person crew. Some people run two-person. If you are familiar with it, that's great, but understand that three-person crew has a lot of dynamics that you'll be talking about in your tournament and going over. Lead, center, and trail are their specific places, and go over really before the tournament what your specific coverage area is, because when you go into these tournaments, you're going to be working with other good officials, the best officials from other campuses, and you'll really need to trust your partners to make calls in their primary and you making your own calls in your primary. So understand that your primary area, review that before the tournament because it will be a higher level of officiating in these three-person crews than on your campus most likely. Understand that there are some fouls that must be made regardless of primary areas. So technical fouls, if a player does an obscene gesture or says something obscene on the other side of the court and it's not in your primary area, understand that that's not something that applies to just being in your primary. You may identify that play and pick it up from anywhere on the court. Some things you may want to review with your crew or go over in your rule book or with your tournament director or someone else before the tournament is your role in free throw administration, dead ball switches, and rotations in the three-person crew. Those three are all important ways that you'll be moving along the court, and it's important to review those before the tournament goes on.
Well, this concludes our Regional Basketball Officials webinar. We hope that the information presented has been beneficial for you, and we wish you the best of luck with your tournament experience.